Okay. Yes. I get to do my introduction again. My name is Ben Duke. I am a performer and a choreographer. I'm the director of a company called Lost Dog. I'll talk more about that in a second. So, I was asked, the questions have gone, but some of this stuff is related to those questions, but I was going to start just with kind of general introduction, which I think is relevant. I hope it's relevant. I'm third child. I just wanted to start with that. You know how worried I'm just going to go through my entire life, which would definitely take me over time. I'm a third child. Apparently, lots of third children are performers. Something about it's about the third child when the parents kind of run out of steam in terms of like their attention, their ability to kind of lavish attention on you. So you're seeking it elsewhere. That's something of a explanation for what I do. I'll skip on through my early stage performances. The thing that I was wanting to talk about was this idea of crossing over, this phrase that was up there. So I started off, I did an English literature degree at Newcastle University. And while I was there, I had my dance epiphany, which was when I was watching this show by Alan Patel called Bernadette. And it was a show on a youth company. And it basically was kind of 15 to 18-year-olds. And they were on stage on this Dodgems track. And I hadn't really watched much dance before then. And they speak and they sing and they dance. And the amazing thing about that show, which luckily I can't find any kind of record of, so it exists in my imagination as the perfect piece of art. The thing about the show was that there were these people on stage, and these people were choosing to express themselves physically, so they chose at certain moments just to dance. And that seemed very novel to me. I was already about 20, so I thought I'm definitely too old to get into dancing, and so I kind of put it to one side. And then I carried on with my plan to be an actor, and I went to the Guildford School of Acting. At the end of that, they said, write your list of companies that you want to work for. And I wrote down, I think I had DV8 and Theatre de Complicité, a company called Derivo. DV8 was particularly high on the list, and I didn't, because I knew nothing about dance, I thought, I'll go and do a year's training, then I'm sure I can join DV8. It was very hard. I've just done a one-year acting course, which I have to say is a lot easier, and you can blag it a lot more successfully. So I then went to Lewisham College, where I was definitely reminded that I probably left this too late, because I was in a class mainly made up of 16-year-old girls, and I was, at that stage, a 24-year-old guy in a green unitard, not leotard. The difference is important. And so the thing is, I was like, this is really difficult. This is going to take me a long time. But I carried on, and then I went to the place and did my dance training there. And then that was good. I felt I was on track, and I left, but I still had this feeling that I was kind of searching for something. So I think when I left drama school, I was like, it's too much in the head. There's too much analysis. There's too much thought about my targets and my motivation and my mini motivation, or what this stuff, endless analysis of the text. We just got to get on and do stuff. So then I went to dance training. I was like, this is fantastic. We're just doing stuff, and this makes me feel a certain way. But then I was like, it's a bit silent, this whole dance training thing. You don't really talk much about stuff. And so then I was trying to find things that were kind of in between, and I was on this path of like, hey, there must be something. I imagine there was this perfect kind of art form out there, which was this like synthesis of all of these ideas. I thought it might be capoeira. I was about to embark on a kind of capoeira. And then luckily I did this workshop with this choreographer called Chris Herring. I don't know if any of you have come across his work. Amazing guy. And he he kind of thrives on confusion, which I thought was an excellent starting point. And he did this workshop, and basically he sets up these improvisations, and then he kind of tells you to kind of just go in there, and the whole thing constantly collapses, and people are like, are we still going? What's happening? What are we supposed to be doing? And he came up to me at one point, he goes, go in there and pretend that you're Brad Pitt. He just set up this like really physical thing, and then he said, so I go in there and try and impersonate Brad Pitt, and it's all going very well, and everyone is deeply confused. And at the end of it all, the conclusion that the thing that he said at the end of this was like, what are you here for? Are you here to learn more skills, or are you here to get better at being yourself? And I thought for a moment, skills, it's all about the skills, I've got to get some skills. And then I was like, oh no, actually the second thing you said, that's much better. Like, how do I get better at being myself? And it came at a really good point for me. I didn't do the capoeira course. I was like, enough of this stuff. I just have to get better at being myself. And what that meant for me was this kind of, okay, I did this English literature degree, I did this dance drama course, I did this dance. Let's just stop trying to find this perfect thing, and let's just sit with this stuff and let it, let it kind of happen. I think that's probably why I'm here, because I am an example of kind of I keep crossing over things, and if you keep doing something, you get old enough, and then people assume you're doing it on purpose, and then they are kind of speak. But so that's kind of the thing. And my most recent crossing over, I suppose, is into this a wonderful world of circus. And unlike the other things which I've definitely experienced in my body, circus I haven't really experienced in my body. I did try standing on someone's shoulders, and I found that very traumatic. So it's not something I don't feel at all an expert on it, but it is something that I find fascinating. And I guess the thing about crossing over, I think initially I find that idea a bit troubling, because I suppose as an artist I want to kind of move past that conversation, but at the same time I recognise the conversation is really important. But crossing over made me think of something a bit kind of military, like kind of, I don't know, something like a crossing no man's land, or a kind of changing allegiances, or some kind of bridge, like I've got to cross a bridge. And that makes me think that, this idea of crossing over means that there's always these two very separate concepts. Like if I'm on a bridge, I'm between dance and circus, and there's only so long you can spend on a bridge before you've got to go one way or the other. So sometimes I find that kind of division not that useful. But luckily, Wikipedia is very useful in these. Crossing over, is there any geneticists in the audience? No, geneticists. No, it's about genetics. Great. I'm going to carry on. Apparently crossing over is also used in genetics. So crossing over in genetics is this idea that it's basically a sharing of it's a sharing of chromosomes between something. So it basically means that you share the characteristics from your parents. So you kind of, these things come to you, but you're going to be a mixture of the things that come from your parents. That seems like a much more useful idea, for me anyway, in terms of this idea of crossing over. So if we're talking about these two art forms, and actually what we're thinking about here is some kind of offspring, something that's like, made up. It comes from these things, but it is its own thing. That also made me think about Lost Dog. We came up with the name Lost Dog, like a lot of people, when you do the Edinburgh Fringe, and then they say, what's the name of your company? And you go, we've got to think of a name of a company, and deadline's tomorrow. It's probably how lots. Anyway, so we sat around thinking about that, and we think about mixtures of things. And we came up with the idea of mongrel. And mongrel was, for me, something that it's not like a labradoodle, it's not like it's like a complete, you don't even know where it came from. It's lost its heritage. It's just a mongrel, and I'm a big fan of mongrels. I think they're normally great, and that was the word that we came up with. We were like, okay, so it's not even a hybrid, it's not even a crossbreed. It's just this thing which is made up of who we are and all of our various influences. It's a mutt, and then mutt yeah, mutt dance, mongrel. It just didn't. Mongrel dance, didn't seem good. So we went with Lost Dog as a kind of step to the side. Anyway, so it's that thing which is a mongrel, and similarly with this idea of crossing over, it's the kind of offspring of the thing. But ideally, the offspring is interesting enough that you don't constantly go, oh, you know, he looks a bit like his dad, or I mean, we do say that about children, but it's a thing. So yes, having said that, I'm going to offer my really very general thoughts on those two things. So this is something that I just took, my circus experience briefly was, I made a piece in 2011 called It Needs Horses, which was for the Place Prize, and it was with two dancers, but it ended up being a piece that kind of looked like circus, because there was a trapeze and they were dressed up in kind of tawdry, traditional circus costumes. And that opened up a whole lot of conversations with people who actually knew about circus, because they presumed that I might know about circus because I've made this piece. I didn't know anything about circus, but what I realized in choosing circus for that piece is that this was a dance competition, and what I really wanted to do was have some way of accessing the audience, like a way of direct contact with the audience. And when I thought about direct contact with the audience, I thought about circus. I thought, if you're a circus performer, you can look the audience in the eye, you can hold out your hat for money, and you can really interact with them in a way that I found difficult within the kind of dance context. So that was the beginning of that, and then through Daisy, I did some research at the National Centre for Circus Arts with some performers. I worked with Nikki and JD. I then very surprisingly got asked to direct a show for the Berlin Methodical Troupe, a show called Kin. And as I was getting into that show, I thought very simplistically that the difference was, so if we're talking about mother and father, I'm not sure which one, probably dance is always female, so if we say dance is the dad and then circus can be the mum, but the thing is that I felt like dance was essentially this kind of introverted form, and circus was essentially an extroverted form. I mean, there are other differences between them, obviously, but that was the thing that I found useful. Like, someone described an introvert to me as someone who dreams themselves into existence. So they basically they feed on what's inside. They have this kind of rich internal world, and they don't really need they don't really need validation from other people. And I'm sure if any of you watch contemporary dance, you will recognize that feeling, like we could all get up and go, and you would just carry on. And that's good for you, but it's a good time. But it's not necessarily what you want from a show. So I feel like that, and there's this kind of this fourth wall thing where it's like, we are here. The dance studio is full of, or certainly the dance studios that I were involved in, it's like curtains are closed, no video cameras. There's constantly like, how does it feel? How does it feel is like a phrase that is used a lot. It's this kind of introverted thing. How does it feel does not come up that much in my circus experience. So for me, circus was more, and I kind of loved it for that. It was an extrovert. It was, I am doing this thing, and I'm doing it in relation to you as an audience. I'm checking in with you. How do you feel about this? If I do this higher, if I make this harder, if I do this, if I take more risk, what does that do to you? So there's this constant checking in, and I guess that's how an extrovert essentially forms themselves, or a sense of themselves. It's done in relation to the outside world, which in this case is the audience. Yes, it's the audience. So my experience in the circus studio was a lot of videoing. There's a lot of videoing that happens. There's a lot of like, how can we make this harder? And that often seems to be connected to the idea of how can we make it more spectacular. And that seems to be for their own sense of kind of challenge, often for their sense of the kind of circus peers who are part of the audience, like, and then for the audience at large, like, how can we make this thing more spectacular? And that pulls in direct opposition to the how does it feel. And I don't want to spend too much time with how does it feel, because I think that can also be self-obsessed. And I was struggling with the how do we make this harder thing, because I was like, there's got to be some balance, I suppose. That's the thing that's was interesting to me. I'm sure there's lots today. There'll be talk about the trick. So the trick was a kind of new concept to me. I mean, I'd been to the circus and I knew that they did tricks, but this idea of the trick being the thing that you work on a lot, you perfect, you kind of polish, you hone into this thing. And actually, once it's there, it's quite hard to mess with. So dance, obviously, you're constantly messing with it, going, do that again, but imagine your insides are made of jelly, and then do it like that. And that kind of instruction was just not. It was just like, no, I can't do that. And neither can I kind of interrupt the rhythm of this. I can't do it here. I need to do it here, and I need to take my time to do it right. Otherwise I might die. And that's the kind of bottom line of it, which is obviously trumps any kind of artistic conversation. It's like, well, yes, that's an important thing. And yes, so it's this kind of what's that? Yeah, so those things pulling apart. Just lost where I was. Oh yes, that's the thing. So it's what that does, and what I noticed that does in the rehearsal studio, is it pulls you completely into the present, and that's what it does on stage as well. Like, dance can have this kind of flow, it can move through. Dance can maintain this fourth wall up to a point. You can kind of, I'm drawing you into this world, it's this imaginary world, come with me, here I am. But you know, in its simplest form, the circus is like, if I'm going to do a trick, what it does is it completely reminds you of the present. Here you are in the present. There is someone risking their life, about to do this thing. There's no other place you can be. And when I started this process, I was like, oh, maybe the trick can be a metaphor. Maybe it can somehow speak about other things. And then I was like, actually, it can't. Well, it kind of can, but it can't really. Like, fundamentally, it is just this thing. And I found that both frustrating and also kind of fascinating, because I thought, well, actually, this is the interesting place, isn't it? This is the real contradiction of these two things. One wants to bring you into this internal introverted world. The other is like essentially reminding you of the present and where you are, and here we are in the theatre, and this is what's happening. Yes, that is my kind of a simplistic sense of what these two things are. And then I was thinking about how, in working both with Nikki and JD, and also working on Kin, how we were trying to bring these things together. And it seems to me that not that this is an answer really to those questions, but for me it was a kind of answer. Similarly, this idea of, you know, a mongrel or some kind of offspring, was that it just has to kind of exist in a single body. So I don't think that this question for me is about, let's get the best circus performers, let's get the best dancers, let's put them together on stage and assume that what's going to happen is going to be an amazing kind of hybrid thing. I don't think it is. I think the job is to kind of put these things together, either in a single body. I mean, it could be in a single body, but that limits you then to kind of solo work. But it could also be like in a single kind of idea. So how, if we're making a piece about this, when is a trick gonna serve us? When is a piece of flowing movement gonna serve us? What is the best way to talk about these things? So this is probably why I find myself resisting that conversation about genres, because as an artist, you're just concerned with, how do I make a good show? That's a primary question. How do we make good work? How do we make work that's, you know, worth watching? and then within that question is like, which bits of that are best served by this particular art form, which bits are best served by this particular art form, and not, for me, not kind of getting hung up on the fact that they pull in opposite directions, but actually kind of embracing that that difference. I often think of Tim Etchells from Forced Entertainment, who's constantly talking about how he thinks of the beginning of the show as a moment to kind of roll up the sleeves and go, you know, we've got nothing. You know, we are like, he describes them as a bunch of kind of crap magicians, which I think is a nice image. We've got nothing to offer here. Everything is we're not trying to disguise the fact that we are in a theatre. We're not trying to disguise anything. We're not trying to be good at acting or anything. We're trying to bring ourselves into the present, which is, I think, what circus does fantastically. But within that idea, I bring you into the present, but what if within that present, what if within that moment where you still know that this is all a sham and it's all illusion, what if within that you still have a moment where you are moved, transported, so you don't feel conned, you're not like, oh, I've been, I forgot where I was, this kind of suspension of disbelief. It's not that, it's the opposite of that. It's like, I know exactly where I am, I'm sitting here, I'm aware of the body of the performers and what they're doing in front of me, but alongside that I'm also kind of, I'm moved, and these two things which seem a bit kind of polar opposites are actually existing in the same moment. So that was obviously a very handy kind of way of making sense of what felt like a problem for me, and I think that's kind of it. That's a brief conclusion. I read on keynote speeches you're meant to conclude with a reference back to the introduction. I feel you've got a kind of complete. Yes, good. So. Yes, I think that is the thing. It's the question about this research project. This whole idea of, for me, I think the conversations about education and all of that is incredibly important, because it seems to me like, how can we expose people to this range of things so that when they eventually come across Chris Herring and decide to stop, doing more training, they're like, what sits in my body? What is the thing that I can use to express what I want to say? And how can that be both the extremity of circus and the presentness of circus, the extroversion, if that's the word, of circus, and the introverted, private thing of dance? Great.
So initially we were going to do an excerpt of our show, but JD had minor surgery 2 days ago, so we thought maybe that's not a good idea. But we are going to do some things which are very safe, so don't worry about us. I guess what we're going to do is actually kind of zoom in on one thing that Ben was talking about, and that's the moment of the trick and that tension between how you put it in a choreography and how does it sit within that. So just to give a little bit of background about us, we started working together 4 years ago. And sorry, I have to get to the top of my presentation because I'm at the bottom. So we started working together 4 years ago. When we first started, what we began working on were, like most circus artists, were acts for cabaret and for corporate kind of events. So it'd be, your 4-minute piece that you can just roll out as your product. And these can be quite formulaic in the way you make them. So you look at what's your repertoire in terms of tricks. You pick maybe 5 to 10 of those. You then pick a track of music. And then you find some movementy bits that fit all of those tricks together. And then we began to realize that those movementy bits are actually quite important. They're dance, And we wanted to spend some time in looking at that a bit more as what gives your work its flavor and not just a string of tricks. And the fact is, right from the start, we were painfully aware that we're not dancers. So I'm a gymnast by training. JD is a bass, an acrobatic bass. We're circus artists. That's what we do. We're not dancers. And if we try to dance and create dance, we'll look like people who are trying to dance, and that would be really embarrassing. So right from the start, we said, okay, we're not going to do that. We're not going to pretend to be dancers. We're going to be circus artists, yeah, whatever that means. And I'm telling you this story because I think this is a common feeling among circus artists. And on the one hand, it's a really healthy recognition of all of the skill that's involved in being a dancer, and that you can't just learn that overnight. On the other hand, it's a limitation that we place on ourselves because it prevents us from stepping outside of our comfort zone and exploring those areas which are not just a trick. It's not a backflip or a handstand or a very particular set of movements that we've spent years learning. I think over the 4 years that we've been working together, one of the key things that we've learned is that high quality movement comes out of a willingness to improvise. And for that, it actually took a bit of time for us to get to that point. It's about leaving all of that can't, the things that I can't do outside of the studio, and just exploring what your body can do, and working with very skilled mentors and people that can help you develop other ways of looking at things and developing movement. So very brief background about the work that we've done so far. So like I said, we started creating these acts for cabaret and corporate. We felt like that's not creatively satisfying, so let's go and create our own show. Meanwhile, we've been working with quite a number of dance choreographers and directors, doing different R&Ds, and we got inspired with an idea. And that idea became Knot, which is K-N-O-T, not N-O-T, and that show, it premiered last year in February 2016 at the Place as part of the Resolution Festival. We've done a little tour with Crying Out Loud, which was great, and we've been part of the Spotlight program. We're now going to be performing at Auch in France as part of the Circuit Festival, so that's really, really exciting. And all of that work was made possible through Déda and the National Centre for Circus Arts and the Arts Council, who supported it. What we really wanted to do with that show was to have a good story that's entertaining, interesting, and engage people. And the circus would support that, and the movement would support that. And we feel we were broadly successful. At the same time, we felt like the journey wasn't yet done. And there was a lot more work to be done in exploring that link between the trick, the circus trick, and the movement choreography, and what we were trying to say, the emotions within movement choreography that we wanted to share with an audience. So we applied to the Jerwood Choreographic Research Program, and we were successful in December in getting a grant, which has been amazing, and that's been supporting us with some research. So we want to share some of those findings, just to kind of hone in on what it is that we found around that moment of the trick. So just to back up 1 second and to look at what is a trick, because we talk about it so much that we forget that some people aren't necessarily in our world and thinking in the way that we do. A trick is an acrobatic movement or an individual skill that a circus artist will learn on an apparatus. It's pretty much all we talk about as circus artists. And importantly, it's the way that we appreciate and we place value and judge other circus artists. So we'll say things like, look at that trick, that was amazing, it was so beautiful and so smooth, how did they do it? And can we do something like that and maybe tweak it a bit? And we'll just spend ages, this might take a fraction of a second, and we will spend literally years learning that fraction of a second. The other thing about the trick is that there is often a moment of preparation before that trick. And that moment of preparation can act as an interruption to the flow of any choreography you're creating. So we learn things in isolation. So for example, if we're going to do this handstand thing, which hopefully we're warm enough to do. So if we do this little handstand, where he just pushes me to handstand, then ideally, if you were doing some sort of like nice movement thing, then you would just go in straight away. But instead, we have to take hands and then be here, and then do it. So there's that moment that is interrupting things. And what we wanted to do with the Jerwood money was look at how can we get rid of that moment, or how can we hide it? What can we do with that moment? So what we found is, yes, we can sometimes get rid of it, and sometimes we can't, which we'll talk about later. But the important thing that came out of this process is we came up with kind of a toolkit, the beginnings of a toolkit, it's never done, to create. And we'll share 3 of those tools with you and show you how they work. So the first is, it's quite basic and obvious in some ways, is working backwards. So if we're going to be doing a trick called a pitch half turn, we would usually do that. So the position we need to get into is this one. So if we look at where is it we can go from here, it might be to there. And then if we rewind that, and from here, and then from that, you realize, okay, you can create some choreography around that. So we did. So a little example is just this. So that's working backwards. We use that for a number of things. Another thing we worked with was, this is quite exciting. We looked at individually, what can we do on the floor? What's a trick we could do on the floor? And then, how can we introduce another person into it so it becomes something new, that's a duo thing? So one thing we looked at was this thing that I don't even know if that's the name that I do, which is like that. And then we were deconstructing it. So if I do that, I've got this hand free for quite a long time, because I go up, and it's down. So we were looking at, well, how could JD interact with that hand? And we realized actually not much. There wasn't much we could do. But if he took the other hand, then there was something that we came up with. And that was this. So that was quite exciting for us because we do this thing, the second bit of that movement is called a cannonball. And usually in choreography it's a bit of a sticking point of how do we get into it, because we have to go through this awkward position that is never easy to get into. And then I wait for him to squeeze. We do that. So with this new way of getting in, it's actually a much more interesting way that we could mix into choreography. Much easier.
Another tool that we were looking at is just looking at a trick and see what it gives us physically. So there's this thing that we do when we warm up, where Nikki just stand on my hand, and it's really good as a warm-up because you find your balance, and yeah, it's just a thing that we do every day. We go like this. So we were like, okay, so what does this give us visually and physically? And we thought there's a kind of precariousness about her position, but also I'm on the floor, so you can't really see me, it's all about Nikki. So we were like, what if we had some text and we tried to use the physicality of the trick to add meaning with the text. We came up with this sequence.
So there's a little bit of text talking about my experience with an ex-boyfriend. So I first fell in love when I was 21. It was the love of my life. Or at least, that's what I thought at the time. And about a year into our relationship, we went on holiday together into the sea, onto the seaside. We picked ourselves along the rocks, looking into pools. And I told him, I'm afraid to swim. I'm afraid of the water. And he said to me, I'll teach you. So he taught me to fill my head under the water. We worked on it every day. And it wasn't long after that trip that he broke my heart. And I decided I'm going to learn to swim anyway. And I did. And I remember the first time I was underwater, and it felt like I was flying. I felt so free.
So yeah, je look at text, but there was another example of that where we just take a trick that looks very, so it's still from the pitch I've done, sorry I'm a bit out of breath. And we looked at, okay, it's very acrobatic trick, so can we try with gestures to change the meaning? So we do this.
So usually when we do this, I have to be quite rigid. But as we became more advanced, I realized I could relax. Oops, sorry. And just have my arms crossed. So I could look quite...
That was not the best example.
That was not the best. I could look quite grumpy, which then fit into one of the choreographies we were working on. So we also, in addition to these tools we also found some things that didn't work, which in some cases were just as valuable in helping us understand how we combine dance and circus together. One of those things is sometimes you do just need the preparation for a trick. So for example, if we're working on a more dangerous trick, there's one where we do a somersault, which we're not going to do right now, but I'll show you the preparation. If we're here, we just need that moment before we do it to relax, get ready. He squeezes my feet, we breathe, go down, and then I would go into the somersault. And we need that so I don't die. And this is why sometimes it's difficult to work with, not difficult, but sometimes when we've worked with dance choreographers, this can be kind of a difficult thing. Because it's sometimes hard to know from the outside what are the important preparations and which are the preparations you can scrap, and what are the important elements of those preparations.
Yeah, so there's been moments where the choreographer is like, okay, you come from here and blah blah blah, and then he's like, can you go from there? And I'm like, oh, I bet the wrong arm, I can't do it. So they're like, okay, it's fine. She keep on going and blah, you're gonna go there, she goes there, and then in the right position now. It's like, no, that was the wrong foot, and just a bit too far, and a bit too on the side, so we can't go from there. So there's a lot of moments where just the choreographer just goes like, huh, okay. Like one small example is the one we did with Martin, where we wanted to go again on this pitch position. So his idea was to do this. Yeah. And then, yeah, we tried, and the idea that she would just run on and go up. But we couldn't do it, just because of the physics of it. The fact that she's running, and that her chest is really down, and then she just can't go up in the pitch. She has to be a bit upright, so like the idea of walking is much easier. And
yeah, and when we worked with that choreographer and we told him that, he just kind of went, huh. And then it just didn't work. I mean, there was like no, it was just a bit of a between us. And then circus artists, on the other hand, we can sometimes fall into a technical pit. And that's where we go, wow, that's really interesting, that moment. Why don't we spend hours looking at how we find a solution to that one little moment, and meanwhile then we lose track of actually how is this fitting in the whole choreography, and what is it we want to achieve in that whole choreography. And that's where it's felt really useful having dance choreographers be working with us, the circus artists, to break us out of that. So the second thing that's been a challenge is that choreographers won't come with all the solutions. I think we initially had this idea that all we had to do was find the good choreographer, and then they would come in, and in their head, they would just come up with this amazing choreography and this really clever way of getting into a trick, and we would just learn it, and then that would be it. It would be, the work would be done. And I think what we've come to understand is that really to work well with choreographers, we have to learn more about the language that they're using. So with the funding from JCRP, some of the things that have been really useful has actually just been going right back down to basics in dance improvisation. So we worked a lot on things like contact improvisation, on how do we use the floor, how do we use our breath, how do we articulate our hands and be aware of our hands, which bit of our body is initiating a movement. It's all of these things as circus artists we don't necessarily spend a lot of time on exploring. And what it meant at the end of this process was we just had a lot more freedom with using improvisation. So we could do things like video ourselves doing an improvisation, or have a choreographer watching us, and then pick those moments that just come out of that work well, and then feed that together into a choreography. And then it's not about us learning a dance choreography that is us trying to be dancers. It's stuff that we've created and we've put together into movement that works, and that can actually feed into tricks as well. So just in conclusion, I'd say the most important discovery we've made has been a new and a less anxious approach to choreography, that we found new ways to produce material, and it's allowed us to work with acrobatics and dance together rather than kind of see them as two separate things. Although not always. In those cases where we do need to have moments of preparation, that we accept it as a moment of stillness. We look how it can work in building tension, and then we've sought problem solving in those cases where it's tricky to remove it, but we see if we can find a way. We still think there's a lot of work to be done in this area, and in particular, we would really value being able to work more with choreographers, just to deepen our skills and understanding around improvisation and dance. And continue pushing our acrobatic technical skills, because like we said, that can loosen us up to be exploring what we can do with the technique itself. And in that way make it fit into the choreography. How are we doing for time?
You've got 10 minutes.
Okay, so we're going to show a very short video. It's about, well, very short, it's about 4 minutes. And many people have seen this before. It's some of the work we've created through JCRP. It's a work in progress, and it's just to share what some of these findings have actually produced. So even if you've seen it, I hope now you'll be seeing it through a slightly different lens. So I hope you enjoy. So Mark, you can share the video.
when JD was on the line.
I just want to kind of give us a short introduction about what I'm showing today. So just about me, a really short background. I come from a dance background. I trained at Dance Contemporary. Once I graduated there, a year or so later, I went into circus. I've been working in the Dance Circus crossover now for about 10 years. So what I'm presenting today is something that I only got asked yesterday to do. But I'm on a self-discovery at the minute. Because I come from this dance circus background, it's took me a long time to get to the point where I'm like, why am I creating aerial without using my dance knowledge? So I've really gone back, and I got injured nearly a year ago now, and it's from that actually that started this journey a little bit for me, where I've had to slowly build myself back up. So I've gone right back to what is movement, and I keep asking myself, is circus still circus without the tricks? So I'm really exploring pure movement, and I've done that. I came in and taught the BA students creative aerial workshop last week or the week before, and we were just looking at movement and moving in the air and that relationship between the ground and getting on the air, into the air. So what I'm showing you is it's not something I'm particularly working on specifically. It's an example of where my exploration is going, just so you can get an idea of where I'm at.
keep that up. I don't think we need to do introductions. I think everyone is kind of okay with me on the panel. So the purpose of this conversation really is to explore a little bit more about the research questions that we kind of showed earlier. In particular, the work that you guys have been doing with NOT, in particular Ben's involvement with NOT, and then Ben's involvement with other circus type stuff and director, dramaturgical stuff that you can be involved with. And then a chance for people in the audience to kind of ask some questions or burning things they may have in their minds with this conversation in mind, really. So I'm going to kick off with a question, nothing horrendous or anything. I'm going to start nicely. So as a section of people, do you think that there is a common ground or common language between the two forms, dance and circus? Is there something there that connects these things together?
Yes, well, I definitely think we all use our body, and there's the idea of using your body to convey something. So I don't know if it's an emotion or a story. I guess what we're all interested is the story side of it. And I think that's what brought us to Ben, is the idea that he likes to explore dance, but with the idea of the narrative behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the body thing, in terms of kind of groups of people, I suppose, like, again, it's a very broad generalization, but if I compare the kind of feeling that I had in the acting school and this like I said before, there's a lot of words, there's a lot of noise, constant kind of noise, and then to go into a dance environment where that is kind of absent, but what's there instead is this like interest in physically doing stuff. And then, you know, my encounter with those circus folk is that there's something similar there. Yeah, there's that. It's about a non-verbal kind of, and interesting in terms of this. One of the things that, you know, this conversation I guess is part of is that actors in general are good at defending what they do. They have champions who are very articulate, and there's this constant, you know, if ever a theatre's threatened with closure, there's, you know, hundreds of famous people who suddenly speak very eloquently about why it should be safe. And actually within dance, and I possibly within circus as well, that kind of, it's people who are interested in physical expression, which sometimes means the kind of the words around it they're not as out there, they're not as clear somehow, and then that means that kind of hierarchy is maintained of like that versus this.
In connection to NOT then, and the circus and dance crossover that is in there, obviously you showed us quite a bit of stuff earlier, and it was really interesting for you to break down for me as well, how you got about approaching movement in its formation of a trick, because it's something that obviously probably quite a lot of people in the room are aware happens to tricks, and there are quite a lot of people who are exploring this crossover or who are doing that. And when you made NOT, did you always have the intention of using movement as a language in that connection with the circus world?
Yeah, because I think one of our starting points, or one of our drivers, has been that when we've gone and seen circus shows, often we feel really inspired by the physicality, but not necessarily moved on that way that we sometimes have been when we've gone to dance performances, where it can just, like, sometimes I just want to cry when I see a dance performance in a way that I haven't yet, and I'm sure they're out there, but there's just something different about the emotional journey that dance and circus can take you on, or what I've seen it's done. And I suppose what inspired us was the sense of, actually, if you take a story, and it's a very simple story, and you engage the audience in that, can we begin to bring that emotional aspect to the work? And I suppose I mean, it's been interesting because then it's a crossover with text and theatre as well. You know, it's kind of not looking at these things in silos, but certainly from dance, what we really wanted to be exploring a lot more was the emotion we put into the movement as a whole, and how do tricks fit within that, rather than looking at the other way around, of tricks being the main thing, and then the dance just kind of makes it.
And as circus performers, what was the most scariest part about movement?
Oh, just, like I said, looking. Yeah, I think because often we'll look at dancers and be like, wow.
But then the same thing happens in the other context. I would imagine there's a ton of dancers who look at circus performers and go like, wow.
Yeah.
Yes. They're for the skills.
Yeah,
for the skills.
that's
But when
good.
it comes to the movement, they're often like.
But in my head, when we're talking about this is a differentiation for me, is that in dance, your skill is the dancing. That's what your skill is. So you'll go to an audition, and your skill will be tested in an audition. So the 5 people in the room are skilled, and that's their skill. Whereas you're seeing your skill as like a thing, and then the rest of what you do is kind of. Whereas you guys are not, you're seeing it as a whole bubble that kind of interlinks everything together, even the text and the movement and everything's going into the part, instead of seeing it as like a skill. And that's a really interesting thing that came out of this, this morning.
Yeah, I suppose a lot has been around trying to break down that lack of confidence around, or the fear of looking like we're not genuine. Because I think it's about wanting to find a genuine process that creates genuine work, and on that level, people appreciate and enjoy it. Not that we're trying to do this perfect thing, this perfect skill. Because I think, coming back to your question at the beginning, I think one of the things that is similar between dance and circus is it attracts quite obsessive people. Not obsessive, but it's like the kind of perfectionist sort of part of you that just, you're drawn to the beauty of movement, whatever that movement style is, and you want it. You want your body to be able to do it. And so that's something that enables you to achieve, but it also can create the stumbling block of thinking, oh, well, I can do this, but I can't do that. So I'm just going to avoid that. So our goal is to kind of move beyond that.
And from your standpoint, then, coming in from an outsider as like a director point of view, not physically within it, and having movement as kind of the form that you were aware of, how was it for you coming into circus and figuring out those pathways that people were trying to pave? Tell us a bit about that. In relation to not and maybe being on TV? I know they're not.
Yeah. I mean, I think with Nikki and JD it was kind of different because there's an initial, they were kind of looking for this thing, but I think that certainly some of the conversations that I had in those first kind of, which were just some research weeks with some performers, there was this idea that your justification for being on stage is this amazing thing that you can do, which is kind of, I guess, a bit what you were saying, like. So how do you actually get on stage to do that thing? What do you do before you've done that thing? What are you going to do after you've done that thing? Those were not questions that were, because of the focus on the actual doing of the thing. So it felt like there was a kind of, dancers, we can dance on stage and off stage. We can use that to do whatever we need to do. But it felt like there's this. And that takes us back to the idea of the trick. The trick kind of was, if I'm awkward or boring or I don't know what I'm doing, but I can do this thing, and that therefore kind of, that gives me the reason for being on stage. But I think with Nikki and JD and with Kim a bit as well, it was a different kind of process. It feels like there was an interest in this thing, which, even though, I kind of worked in dance and movement, it felt like it was more a question around dramaturgy and kind of storytelling. It felt like that was the kind of interest. yeah, I was going to take credit for being one of the choreographers to demonstrate to Nikki that choreographers don't provide any answers. We just kind of sit around going, yeah, try that. Yeah, it wasn't. I was never involved in a kind of like, here's some movement that could work well with this. I felt like what I was involved in, which felt similar, I mean, to the processes I'd done in a more dance context, was what does this movement say? How does it speak to me? How does it fit with the story? What journey does it kind of take me on? So that was then the process that we were kind of engaging together, I suppose, and it was more, how to make that clear.
Okay. Questions? Daisy.
I wanted to ask Nikki and JD about the question that Ben says you don't ask, but I think you do, which is how does it feel? And how much that goes into what you do. And well, maybe he's right, maybe you're not asking that question. I mean, clearly, how does it feel? It all blooming well hurts, but that's putting that to one side. It's the biggest problem in circus. But how does it, do you think about that?
I don't know. I do. I don't know. I guess what I feel like we constantly think about is how does this make the audience feel? And that's certainly like what we've been pushing more and more is being aware of that question. So you're not just kind of thinking from the circus artist, but what would it impress my circus artist peers question?
Yeah.
Which I think, often you have to work hard to try to put to one side. It's that, that would be so cool. Although my circus artist peers would think that's so cool kind of thing, and going like, oh, no, okay, that's one little bit of the audience, and then there's the whole rest of the population who are going to come to see your show.
Do you do cooking?
Me personally, no. I guess there is parts of dance that do that, but I think, like I was saying, most of the dance that I was involved in was trying to put that away. I think was trying to be like, no cameras, no mirrors. Let's just, how does it feel? So it was a kind of internal thing. I suppose there is some element of dance that kind of concerns itself with, how does it make the audience feel? But I feel like in the same way that I was thinking, like, it's okay. A lot of people become dancers because they like dancing. They might have discovered that in a club, or the feeling of dancing. Like it's an okay thing to do by yourself in a way that I don't think circus. I mean, do you do? You wouldn't do. You wouldn't do circus by yourself, would you? Just for the sake of it?
Well, you do actually.
I mean, you practice it obviously, but it's like
you train obsessively. And what's interesting is we meet a lot of people who are. Who don't perform, who actually can do skills at a really high level, and they just go to acrobatic conventions, and they are the hardest to please when performing because they never go through this creative process. They're just thinking, oh, can that person do that trick? Oh no, it's not that great. But all they're thinking about is trick. We do as well, but we're constantly pushing and looking at how do we challenge that. And interestingly, I think some of that, how does it feel? In more of that performance way has come through when we improvise, and we're just doing contact improvisation. We're like, oh, that felt really great, and then we'll watch it back on a video and then assess whether it looks great too. And then actually sometimes the bits that don't feel so great actually look the best, and that's really interesting. So it feels like we're constantly thinking about that. Like we're thinking about how does this feel like it's interesting and new and would be engaging to watch. And does it actually appear that way?
I think it's just the way, I think for me it's just the way the process is. It's just the circus. You're just going to have to repeat that thing a lot of time. And it's all about that. It's just like we do it, we analyze why it didn't work, do it again, we analyze. So it's all like just very concrete, like technically why it didn't work, blah, blah. So I don't think you can really feel, except the pain. Like this kind of thing that you like. I think it's more, I think the process of the dance improvisation, because you have time to get into it and it doesn't stop every 5 seconds, it's just you get into it, then you start to feel like, oh, I can't feel anything.
There's like
I think it's just because there's a length of time where you're doing things and you try, you can try things, but because it's flowing, you can, okay, it didn't work, but I can try this, I'm going to try that. Whereas I think it's more cerebral in the circus side of it. It's more like okay, we can try this. It didn't work. Why don't we try this? And also because our discipline is two of us. Maybe it's different if you do trapeze and then you're on your own and then you can get lost into it. But because it's two of us, so it's like, yeah, there's never getting too much lost into it, except on the floor, basically. Yeah.
We had a question over here.
2 points really. One is about what are we crossing over? Do you not think that gymnastics is actually what is part of this?
Yeah.
And also, in a performative context, everything that all of you are describing is devising.
Yeah, and I guess that's...
So let's just call it that.
Yeah.
yeah, that would be quite satisfying. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I was a gymnast.
I know, that's why I'm saying it.
Yeah, and it felt very much... I mean, circus just feels like gymnastics, but without the competitions.
Or with a story.
Yeah, really similar mentality. You know, it's all just about getting the trick.
People are much nicer.
That's true.
You can be more creative as well.
Circus allows there to be a crossover.
Quickly go to this one.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that, I think it's the same, like, let's call it devising and let's call it performance.
Yeah.
Let's call ourselves performers, and then, it's all there.
Rachel.
I think the first time I met you and listening to how you talk, it's very different from how some other I mean, I'm sorry, it's hard to generalise, but I think the first time I met you, you spoke in a different way about your work and what you wanted to do. So it sort of made me think, it's fantastic the journey you're on, and I'm not sort of surprised because actually from the beginning you seem to be on that journey of questioning and asking different questions. And I wonder if that's partly because you both were educated in America and Italy and France. So I don't know if that's a cultural thing. But I suppose that's just a comment. But then the other sort of question really is, what advice would you, having been on this journey, what advice would you give to those in the room and out of the room who are involved in circus education and higher education to actually allow the sort of process that you've gone through with this project and with your Gerald amazing funding to experience the same?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I think when I look back at when I was at school, I was in such a different state of mind that I feel like it took me to go out of school and then realize that there was a lot of things that I didn't know how the world outside would be. And then they can tell you that at school already, like, you should think about this, you should think about that. When you're in the process, you're just like, oh, I'm just doing this. And then you come out and then you realize, oh, I should have listened to what they said the whole time. So I mean, like, they give you the tools at school, but I feel like if you just don't take them, yeah. I mean, and the good thing is you can learn after that. I learned so much more after school. Yeah.
But in circus school or school?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, circus school. But it's funny because we both done degrees before, so maybe there was already, the same for you, I guess, maybe there's already a questioning. Mm-hmm. And then you don't come when you're 18, you already done something else. And then, I don't know, actually. Yeah, maybe it's part of the process.
Yeah, coming from a different background. I mean, I suppose the advice I always feel for circus artists starting out is, I still think the technical skill is so important. And I know that's kind of like back to front from all the stuff we're discussing now, but it's in getting to a certain level that you're able to open your mind and look at.
I don't think if you'd been doing dance at the same time as it in that technical skill,
that would have been better.
You had that sort of physicality.
Yeah.
Fluidity. Not just about the skill.
Yeah. And I mean, and then it's interesting about where your mindset is, because I remember as a gymnast, and so I didn't go to circus school, but I remember being a gymnast, and our coaches brought in this ballet teacher, and she was going to, we were going to do once a week, because I was going 5 days a week to training, and then we would have 1 day a week we were going to do ballet for an hour, and we were like, what is the point of that? We don't really appreciate ballet, and we made this woman cry, and she left after about 4 weeks, and then our coaches were like, we're never going to bring in another ballet teacher again, you know, it's like, fine, just do gymnastics. So I don't know, there's something about, and I don't know, you know, we were so young, we were like 10, whereas, you know, circus artists hopefully are at a later stage of development. But if you're in that mindset, no matter how much good dancing people throw at you, you're not necessarily going to take it out. I don't know. I feel like ideally a school would be able to teach everything at a level of excellence. You know, that's kind of the ideal. And it's a question of how does that get put together so that the people coming through the program actually take it on board and use it to its most, and ask questions as they do it.
There is a feeling of a secondary, not a secondary level, but when, say for example, if dance incorporated circus, it would come as a secondary like part of that program, and if circus incorporated dance, it would come as a secondary. You know, I've seen from both ends that cycle, and it always, I think what the feeling is about this program is how do we better support the people who are trying to be in that cycle, to have the pool of people and the resource and the time and the space to be able to make those mistakes and have the reflection on that, to be able to go back into something and readdress what they're doing, instead of putting that product, in a really bad term to call it actual product, in front of a paying customer who's probably going to see the same things that we might be seeing, and that's where you guys can really differentiate in that cycle a little bit. Stephen, did you have a burning question?
I think Olivia wanted to
Olivia.
before me.
Yeah, I think it leads on from what you were saying really, and my question is for all of you about the creative process on a daily basis. So, and I'm asking this because it's a question for us as well. So if you've got answers, brilliant. So how do you tackle it? Because the way that you come at a dance show or create a dance show is very different to the way you create a circus show. There's sort of two different forms and structures. And so how do you then...
Sorry, can I just ask you to explain what the differences are?
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, I was a gymnast, and then I went to dance school, and then I learned, Jan taught me hand to hand. So I didn't go to circus school. But from a dance perspective, I mean, as Ben was saying, it's sort of, you know, you think more about the intention and the rhythm of a show, and you have various choreographic processes in which you make movement through different creative processes. You might use text. For example, we just worked with Jonathan Lunn in our show, and he used a lot of text, and he put movement to the text, and then we interwove the circus within that. From a circus perspective, what I can tell, because I've been involved, I've worked for circus companies, but not as many, as much as dance companies, but you come sort of from, like Nikki and JD were saying, the movement, and then you sort of work outwards, or you pad around it. I mean, I don't feel like I can speak expertly on that side of things, but for me, when I was working with pure circus, it was very different to working with pure dance. The choreographic language of dance is the centerpiece, whereas for circus it's the skill level. So what the problem that we have is that it takes so much time to be a good level hand to hand, and it takes a lot of time to be a good level of dance. And so, you know, we have in one day, in 8 hours, we have to try and fit in a dance warm up, which takes at least an hour, and then you have to warm up your tricks, which takes another hour and a half, and that's like 2.5 hours, and you've not even made anything yet. So, you know, my question is, like, did you have a process where we played around with different ways. We played around with trying to sort of do both at the same time, which didn't really work. And at the moment, we sort of worked out that we warm up one, we warm up the other, and then we sort of bridge the gap with contact improvisation and text and theatre, and wrap it all up to put it in a very brief form. But what did you discover for that? On the daily process of having, right, we've got 8 hours and we've got 5 days and we're going to make something with both forms, go? Like what? Yeah. Like how did you approach that? I
Go.
guess it's like my question. It's sorry, it's not very.
It's so
eloquently
tricky.
said.
It's true though. It's so tricky.
Do it. Yeah, I mean, it was, again, working with Nikki and JD was kind of different. They came to where I live, where we have a space, but it has a low ceiling. So there was lots of stuff that we just simply couldn't do there. And it felt that, in a way, that was useful because the focus was just on, I suppose, the more like a dance rehearsal, a kind of physical warming up, then getting into a kind of physical processes, but including that idea of story and dramaturgy through that. So that felt like, but then obviously you spent time in other places working on that. With BMT, I think it was a constant problem.
So
it was
difficult.
A constant problem. Yeah, it was like, because of exactly what you've explained, and I came out of that with no concrete kind of thoughts, except that if I did this again, it would need to be different. And I think there's a very different energy to that. And I felt like the company were most energized when they were like, in this, how do we do that? Cool, let's make that, let's do that. This kind of, this obsession, this kind of going into this absolute detail. And you could feel how they support each other, and they could develop amazing things, but that's like 3 hours gone, disappeared into this place. Yeah. And I was like, that process kind of needs to happen, probably without me actually, because I don't have much to say about it. Like that could happen. But the difficult thing was we knew roughly what we were trying to do with some of that stuff. Whereas if it happens in complete isolation, then you've just got a whole lot of stuff that you're then going, well, what do we do with that? So it felt like I think the ideal would be some kind of 2-week research process where you're developing ideas that probably feels a bit like a devising dance process, then a period of time of training and tricks, and then a period of time of trying to bring it back together. But still you've got the question in each day of like how you prepare the body, how you prepare the mind.
So you need two creative periods, like you said, a solid block, followed by a bit of a rest and digestion, followed by like a training block.
Yeah, a training block with that stuff in mind of what you've started
followed by a third block, putting it all together, and then of course that's like millions of quid, isn't it? So if anyone can do that.
I think the good thing is, the tricky thing for the BMT boys is probably there's quite a lot of different circus stuff in their show, so that like you guys just do hand-to-hand warm-up and dance warm-up.
And then there's tinterboard, and there's theorem, and then it's like, and if everybody tried to do their discipline on the same day, it's never right. And then your mindset as well of like going to one thing, then you get cold, and you're like, then you try to do a bit of theatre to link what you've done, and you try to come back to the movement, and it's like.
And this comes up to a question we're having about how, as a sector, we better support the development of that work. And maybe, maybe dance shouldn't go to the studio for 6 weeks and churn out a show. That might be the other issue on the other end of the spectrum, to be able to speak about dance artists. And maybe that's not the right thing for them to do. Maybe they need a time of place where they have to do something a bit different to shake up what's coming out of the other end. But it's about us figuring out a way where we can offer support for artists who are interested in doing that, where they can have safe havens, let's call it. Not like they need a safe haven, but more of an environment where you're allowed to have different people in and something to.
It's about being realistic at that time.
Yeah.
Lots of places in Europe where they go, you need 4 months to make a show, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
We're in the UK and you're supposed to do 4 months.
4 hours.
But that model of doing it in blocks is exactly what Motion House, the same thing with block. So they worked with Motion House and the dance for 2 weeks, showed some work in progress, then they were at the ball for a while and the circus line, and then brought them together. But they did have 6-8 weeks worth of explanation.
Even with that, having talking to Kevin about it, the circus people and the dance people were actually quite separate.
Yeah,
they didn't have both. The hand-to-hand couple, for example, didn't dance. The dancers do sort of, the motion house tricks, but they didn't do the hand-to-hand, So I think that must have been a problem. Sort of trying to do that. And having,
And if you, there's like French companies that come and they have a whole structure and they play with the structure, which is like, would be a dream, but it's like, then you talk to them and they're like, oh yeah, we had this space for 6 months. And obviously then you're going to find loads of ways to play with your structure. But you just need the time to try things, and that is not going to work. You're going to have to change your structure. Do you know what I mean? It's just such a long process.
Yeah.
Did you have a question, too? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to, if we're exploring crossover, or mongrel, or whatever form it takes, I just wanted to set the conversation slightly broader, because in some ways, some of the conversations I've had so far today, circus has kind of been akin to acrobatics and aerial. It's so much more, and you could say exactly the same for dance.
Yeah.
And I think it's important we see it in that broader picture, because that informs that little exchange about devising and development process. And actually, words like clown and fool aren't in the room at all, and actually they completely underpin the otherness of circus, the spirit. And that, so devising for me doesn't really cover it. There's something more profound about that attitude, which is about reflecting difference and positioning ourselves in relation to everything else in society. Oh boy, is that important right now. And so those kind of roots that circus are vital. And we mustn't have this conversation in a bubble. It has to be part of
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the clown and the fool is so important, but it's been taken out of a lot of training, and so it's kind of this idea that it's somehow become a separate thing. I don't know about
I mean, we do have clown in the first year.
You do,
yeah.
But everything's quite separate, isn't it? So it's like, because I also teach at the National Centre, so I have some experience with the students there. And each, I find a lot of students approach each thing separately. So they don't take the kind of choreographic tools that they're learning in their movement classes and their ballet classes and the theatrical tools that they have from their clowning and their theatre to use that and tackle their discipline. And the way the classes are structured, discipline classes are structured, are very, very different to the way. So it is happening, but it's not. I think on a quite profound level, it's being treated very separately. That's my experience.
There was a question here.
Yeah, it was just going back to before the actual devising process, as somebody who wants to create and choreograph. I have a dream of having an 80-year-old actor who's flying in a harness, and then a young dancer who's in text, and it's all merged together. Where do these people exist? Where are they? Like you're saying, do you do block where you train them in all these different things? Do you put a call out and say, I need you to do harness, drama, singing, dance, Kaylee dancing? Do you put it all to
I mean, there's a company in the Midlands called Highly Sprung who have made they've made a few circus works that involve some elements of circus, but they come from a physical theatre text standpoint, and they've made some fantastically successful young people's shows, and it's been at Warwick actually. They really are a fabulous company, and they trained as theatre performers, I think, and then took the time to learn the other elements of the skill. And they've got an amazing outdoor show called Urban Astronaut, which is just basically this big, massive astronaut on the end of a big stick that transfers through the streets. It's like it's not a stick. It's a really well-designed piece of engineering. But it floats through the streets, and it's amazing how that performer is actually a physical theatre-trained performer who then went into the studio for that process and learned that skill, and has now taken that skill and it forms quite an element of their practice on what they're doing.
I think it is a real challenge.
Yeah.
Certainly with USP has always been circus with physical theatre. I don't think we've ever, in 20 years, found the perfect performer who can do it all in the time.
It's about crossover, as you were saying, because I know there's a tour around the circus school in Tilburg in Holland. It actually wasn't a circus school, it's a department in university, and they have a modular system, so it means that architecture students could go and cross over into circus, and circus artists could go and cross over into architecture and mathematics and all the other. And I just think that sort of attracted some really odd, and I think circus does attract oddballs in some ways, in a very nice way. Often people who don't necessarily fit into a conventional curriculum and further education. So what what I saw in Tilburg was this rather amazing sort of fusion of students who would never, get together, and as a result, there was some, falling out. So I think looking at education, I know we're going to talk.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm just going to say that higher education often thinks in silos, and it was trying to get that crossover and make the mechanisms to allow for that crossover to take place. The conversation we were having yesterday in Dock with Walter Ferrero was really fascinating, where they've got a dance department, they've got a circus department, they've got music, and the will is there for the crossover, but the mechanisms aren't there for it to happen yet because of the institution.
But I'm also going to back up a little bit what Zoe says, which is that there's a kind of, there's a circus, there's a truism in circus, which is if you're training animals, clearly that's not what we're talking about here, but if you're training animals in a circus, you take an animal, you take a horse that likes to rear up on its back legs, and you go, oh, you're a horse that likes to rear up on your back legs. I'm going to teach you to do that in a way that I want you to do it. So you're never teaching an animal to do something that it doesn't want to do anyway. And weirdly, it's sort of the same with circus students. What you take a student as a young raw person, and you find the thing that really sets them on fire, and they focus on that. And you can't, as an organisation, as an institution, tell people, and Zoe said this, and Déda kind of integrated it as well, you can tell them as many times as you can to your blue in the face that this is what they need to be, this is what they need to be writing. But until they make that discovery themselves, it doesn't mean anything. And with all due respect, I don't think it's a coincidence that Nikki is a little bit older. And in terms of the journey she's been on, she's coming to this with a level of experience and maturity that most students coming out of a degree at 22 just don't have. And that there is a maturity that is required that you can't teach in a 3-year degree, and that you learn. It's what we say to our students when they graduate. I say to them every year, I say, this isn't the point where it ends, this is the point where it begins. And I think Zoe and the other graduates in the room would agree with that. That you come, what we do is you come out of a degree, and certainly you do this well, you give them everything that you can at the time, and then you let them fly, and it's up to them to find whether they like to be the horse that rears up, or whether they want to be one that goes around circles. It's up to them.
But do you not think that's got...
I don't try on you.
Do you not think that's got something to do with what they're being put in front of? So for quite a lot of time, I think this happened in dance. Dance was very similar to where you were trained in something, and now in dance you're trained to be you're not trained to be something, you're trained to be an all-rounder. Yeah. And I don't know, I think circus has changed quite drastically over the last 5 years in what people have been able to see in the UK particularly. And I feel like that is having an influence on what the people who are going into training want to come out and make. So there are plenty of people who are coming through the Lab Time Squared stuff and the training institutes and out of that space who want to make work that is very slightly on the raw side of what they're doing, which incorporates text and maybe some dance and maybe something else, because they're getting the opportunity now, because of great festivals and great people who are in the room, who are showing influences from international resources about what we can actually do. And that's where I think the change is happening. Do you see what I mean? I think there's a lot of people like, Nikki is a bit older, maybe she has been on that journey, but maybe that journey is happening earlier now because of the visuality that we're getting to be put in front of.
Well, I think it's clear that all education requires something at the end. It's stuck. You want to be stuck, you want to be starting children and journeys too on this kind of journey.
Yeah.
So the quality of the work is very important. But I think that there are phases in a way that there is a kind of...
Yeah, well, it's a bit like...
It's something we've noticed at social media is that in the early days, when people weren't getting grants or student loans or whatever to come to us, people were coming older, they were doing other degrees first. And when they left, they were making work that, frankly, was deemed more interesting than the 21-year-olds can make now. And it's simply a fact of being 21.
Yeah.
You have to work out what it is you need to say.
Can I ask the Cypher boys who are at the back how you approach it? Because you guys are coming at it as well from a crossing over type of angle. And how do you approach it from what you...
What I noticed earlier when we already spoke during the lunch, we've not researched so much the circus and dance meltdown how you have, but more specifically, we come from the street dance styles, specifically hip hop and breaking.
Yeah.
And rather than the actual movements, we've taken more of the qualities. So for instance, in hip hop, it's all about being unique and original. Yeah, we have a foundation and a base, but I don't want to dance like him, he doesn't want to dance like me. And it's the same when we train. So for example, Sia where we both do it, and then Charlie, and then there's Pete and the year below us, and we all dance. But we've all taken it a completely different way because that's how our hip hop training came in. And then it's the same when we make stuff, the style in what we would do, rather than the moves being that's the move. We've all got our own tweaks on it, so we haven't found the melt that you guys have.
But maybe you have. Maybe you've just done it automatically.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Maybe that's just natural thing because of the training is gone like this. That naturally you have found something that is.
Yeah.
Breakthrough.
Yeah, just something interesting for education, because I went to 3 different circus schools, and all of them luckily were quite good in the dance part, so we had a lot of influence, a lot of good teachers. What it comes down to is that dance is such a vast area, and only later I realized doing 2 classes a week of ballet and 2 classes of contemporary will not bring you there where you want to be a dancer. Even so, you might not know about Graham and Cunningham, you will at somehow in one moment have to encounter and understand the technical side of it. And I think it might be easier to go by intensive weeks, for example, in dance, in circus schools, to really get a hang of it. Because if you do dance, it's easier from coming from a circus perspective to just do this and nothing else, and not get influenced by the hand-to-hand, for example. Because in the circus school, like honestly, you do warm-up, and you do probably a tumbling class, then you do a dance class, and you spend the rest of the time just doing hand-to-hand. That was my circus school. So basically, like, you're so fixated on one skill, and you need the 3 years to have the level, because if you don't do it, you go out, it won't work. Because you don't have the level high enough to, like, come into the market to, like, perform with it. So it's really tricky, but I know that in this space, if you have intensive times, you could actually probably become much further advanced in certain techniques, because we did, for example, intensive clown, and that was like breakthrough after 3 or 4 days maybe, not the first day, not the second day. After 3 days, we're like, oh wow, I got a hang of it. That's actually like, where clown goes or where it could go. And I think it's the same for dance, like only after probably like doing like now 3-4 years of freshman class, nearly every time I get the feeling, yeah, that might be the idea of where dance could go.
I think as well the difference, there's a big sort of, I don't know if you guys have found this, but for me, I came from gymnastics and went into dance. And for me, there's 2 different ways of thinking about it. When I was a gymnast, my thought process was like this. And when I went to dance school, I had to change it to do this. Because when you learn gymnastics, everything is very isolated. And when you learn dance, you can't think of one move in isolation. You have to think of it as something that's completely fluid. So for me, I remember like a click in my brain where one day I was dancing and I was not thinking like a gymnast. And that was like, that took me 2 years of training at dance school, and I suddenly was like, whoa. And I think that's the same as what Jan's talking about, it takes that time to have this like mental, to sort of merge it in your brain as well, to then be able to tell your body, okay, I'm not just doing a handstand now, I'm doing this entrance into this, which goes into a handstand, and then I come out and I move on and I tell a story at the same time. And I think that is the difficulty, because like I say, what we really need is we need a school that does like 50% dance and 50% circus. But then of course, there's all those branches of different dance and different circles, and we've got to include all of that. So
can I just one back? Just something
No, you can't.
I'm just following on. Just in terms of that training thing, this is my opinion, in terms of the physicality of the dance and the circus artist, and are the 2 things completely compatible with training in terms of physicality, the physical needs of an aerialist and a ballet dancer and a contemporary dancer? Is there a fit there?
I think there is, but I started doing gymnastics when I was 3, so you have I think you need a kinesthetic awareness and a certain knowledge of knowing where you are upside down and strength. And then when I started doing ballet, you know, they had to beat all the gymnastic, you know, the pointy hands and the shoulders and the arched back out of me. And they did that, you know, but if, you know, I worked on that and I feel like there was, once I got that sudden like, okay, now I understand this, after that, it felt really compatible. But there was that initial time where I was like, whoa, this is really different.
Yeah, the danger as well with training, trying to do 50-50 of each, is actually you do a 3-year program of 50-50 and you come out with people that are good, but actually I don't know if you can simultaneously train dance and soca at the same time and get both amazing. You know, there's going to be the exception in every rule, but I'm not sure that actually it doesn't stop them.
I think what we're talking about here are structures of learning, which is what I was trying to get at. And actually, I love the horse on the back and I enjoyed the horse running around. I think there's a horse that does something extraordinary as well. There's probably three. If you think of those as your types of learners, it's better to not be thinking that it's 50% or 20% or 80% or any of those constructs. I was listening to a lady at the front there who said it's a bit of a pain. We try and teach them all these things in modules. They never seem to put it together. That happens across every single aspect of higher education learning. It's not particular to this set of disciplines. And it's because the horse on the back legs, the one running around and the one going to do something extraordinary, hasn't decided what they're going to do with the information yet. And everybody learns at a different pace. And the gentleman there who said about, you know, the older students get it, age before beauty, but beauty combined with age, as our example. It's one of the reasons why conservatoires don't take students who are very young. And by very young, even if they've come from first degree, they send them away again because they want that person to have life experience, to have thought, to have imbibed what it is that they're wanting to do. Now that doesn't exclude those learners who are potentially, like the guys behind me, who know exactly what they want and who are going to go from there to there because they've got it. And I think we just have to be a bit more nuanced with what we think a university education is about and how long it goes on for. And, you know, using Malcolm Gladwell's exposition of how long does it take to become an expert or a master of what you do? 10,000 hours. That's about 8 years. So I think we shouldn't expect to have the fully founded individual after a BA or even an MA. But also see the richness of what you offer on the palette, which may not be everything, because you've got everything there, but as long as the horse on the back legs, the one galloping around and the one who's going to do something extraordinary can find something that they then take on. That's all you can do, and it's then about one last theory, which is the theory of creativity, which is to do with constraint. Within all of that, and actually in some of the devising examples that you've given, I'm going to use devising just for so, it is about the low ceiling that made it operate in a particular way. It is about not having enough money. And we have to see that one of the things that we're good at is being creative in difficult circumstances. I'm not an advocate for the Tory party in trying to make it more difficult, but it is a political point. And the arts that we're talking about are very eloquent about human beings, and we need to keep that at the forefront, because whoever we're putting on these courses, whoever chooses to go on these courses, they are going to be wanting to talk about the resonances for them, and that for me is what's important about any training. It's what's communicated and the value of that.
Claire, we'll probably follow on.
I just wanted to kind of make an observation about when the third method that you've come up with, Nikki and JD, which is around using text to take away the emphasis of what you were doing at being purely a mechanical trick. So when you were talking about, this is my experience of my ex-boyfriend teaching me to swim, And the kind of metaphor that you created through that, by stepping on JD's body, that for me didn't sit with dance, it didn't sit with contemporary circus, acrobatics, theatre. It was art without definition, because it spoke to me. And just in terms of the art that has always spoken to me, I've never really been able to define what that is. So, you know, I was talking at lunchtime about Enter Achilles, you know, having seen that and seeing a great piece of rope aerial work within that just completely blew me away, because it told the story in a way that just couldn't be told on the ground. And I just that's kind of, I don't know whether we're just tying ourselves up in knots trying to think about calling it something when it just is about the people that make it. I'm not trying to get too carried away with categorising things.
And I would never want to categorise it. I mean, I've spoken here quite openly about neutralising the programme in general, so our programme would just be a performance programme that is neutral of any form of, it doesn't specify whether it's dance or circus, it's just an open, and I've spoken to Stephen about it.
That doesn't mean bland.
No, not bland, but it's just a programme that doesn't specify what that show is. It's a performance programme that you get the chance to pick. But for me, the really interesting things is like what you guys did, and when I've seen some people who are juggling, you know, I went to Canvas and I think Jose did like a really small snippet of some juggling work. It was so massively movement based in my eyes that I was like, oh my goodness, that is like a movement show in itself without me even thinking that he's actually juggling. And that's where the interest is, you know, for me it's about where can Déda and the organisation continue to help, whether it starts in the training, because that's what we're starting to do with the Circus Youth Company, with our degree programmes. Where can we continue to help people who are wanting that get to where they are, and then once they've got to that practice level, how do we better support them as an organisation to be allowed to make the great things that you guys want to make? And then I'm not going to sit you in front of a million people and go, this is dance and circus, and go, this is it, we've done it. Like, do you know what I mean? It's about that, because, you know, someone that, you know, Jose might just come to me and be like, my practice is not dance, and I would be like, I would have a question about that to yourself, because actually it's, you know, tremendously movement based, and the Gandinis have been doing some really funky stuff with ballet, and they're going to do something with Sita Patel. So, you know, that's for me where I think the excitement sits, and helping that to grow, and then artists to grow.
I think, I suppose, just on a really practical level, one of the things that for us, and acknowledging everyone is different, has been really helpful and inspiring is whenever we've got like a chunk of time with a certain choreographer. So let's say it's like 4 to 6 weeks of doing daily work with that person and getting a good sense of a different way of working. And you know, it's the opportunity to really sink your teeth into a different approach, a different way of using your body, a different technique for improvising, you know, all of that. But unless you have that kind of chunk of time to immerse yourself, it becomes just kind of a concept that you're not really drawing on. It's been more through intensive projects that we've found a way in that feels like, okay, that gives us another tool in our box.
On that note, I think I have to wrap it up. There is now going to be tea, coffee, cake, biscuits, fruit, and juice in the foyer.
Thank you. So this is the second panel discussion, and we're going to try and talk about the sector and what are the two sectors, if you like, what that might look like in 5 years' time, what are we working towards. And I wanted to look back a little bit as well as looking forward, look back at contemporary dance and the journey that it's been on in establishing itself, getting 2 feet on the ground, and the journey of contemporary circus as well. And to help us do that, so just introduce and to say a little bit about Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Clare from CrossingOver, and we sort of have 2 roles. One is that we tour and make connections with partners all over the UK. Partly, one is called Circus Evolution, which is a network of touring, and then the other work that we do is artist development, and that is, well, it's quite loose. We don't have a fixed programme. It's based around a sort of stable of artists who we work with, to make connections and help develop and help the next step. Artists who we decide to work with, there isn't an application process. So in fact with Nikki and JD, we work with them to tour the show Not as an opener for a double bill last year. So that's an example of what we do.
I'm working at Warwick Art Centre. This is our current brochure, which is on the University of Warwick campus, and that is just outside Coventry, so it's not that far from here. Also quite near Birmingham, and it's very much a cross-art form programme at Warwick Art Centre. And if I go through what we had on last week, it kind of indicates we had the Moscow Philharmonic Orchestra in our big hall. We had Racehorse on tour from Crying Out Loud with Circus Evolution. That's a big circus company from Helsinki. The show Super Sunday. We had the National Theatre on tour with their Brexit show called My Country. We had Ace Dance and Music from Birmingham with a show called 10. We had Indian classical musicians. We had ending up with Madeleine Peru, who's a sort of folk pop singer. So one of the reasons that I was interested in taking the job there is I worked in dance for about 25 years, and this was my way of kind of getting out of the dance box. So, because I'm dealing with all the other balls now.
I'm Fran. So as I said before, I come from dance background, and I work in social service for my associate artist here and associate artist with a company called Citrus Arts, which is a dance service theatre company based over in Wales.
Thank you. So there was only two provocations or two post-it notes, and I'm going to read them actually. So one of them, really high-fluting, what does the accent over Déda mean? Which, so let me just say, that is typically a graphic design thing. D is from Derby, D is from dance, Derby dance, and then to make the kind of logo look good, they put an accent on it. Thank you, Julia. That one. And the second one. Yeah, there's this question: how long do Déda's associate artists stay on the roster, and is there a capital investment? And yet, I mean, it's a 2-year programme that we run in terms of the associates, and it's called the Generator Programme, and there is kind of a bursary funding scheme attached to that. Now they're out of the way. Can we just start? I mean, and Julia, would you mind? I mean, because someone said that Nikki was all, my God, it's like, I feel like the old places. I just feel that just been around dance for many, many years, since the early 80s, when I first went to London. And I remember getting off the train from Scotland, and the Place was the first building I went into knocking, trying to get a job there. And that has continued. And so my association with dance, first in production and lighting design and touring, it's a huge knowledge that I feel I've got. And a lot of people went on that journey. Julia, I'd just like you to talk a little bit about your perception of the journey that dance has gone on, and in terms of the infrastructure, and because it really feels like dance is standing on its own 2 feet now, and we're having this debate about contemporary circus. There's really I've heard a lot of people say that dance has done it. So would you mind just?
I'll try. This will have to be a ruthless kind of summary, but there are often conversations about how circus is now where contemporary dance was about 25 years ago in terms of buildings, infrastructure, funding levels, room at the top table, need no critics to write about it properly, blah, 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 all those kind of checklist of what do you need to stand on your own 2 feet. And I'm probably now rewinding to a moment where Steve Munn was doing lighting design at the Place, and I'm the kind of baby we were called dance officers in those days at the Arts Council, which had a very posh building at number 105 Piccadilly, you know, when there's a load more money around. And the situation, what you need if you're a funder, and indeed if you're a building, right, is artists. And what was fantastic at the time when I was kind of really getting going at the Arts Council was that there was an incredible team of dance artists bubbling up. And I was sitting, having been warned about this question by Steve, trying to remember who, so fill in some gaps for me, if anyone like Rachel might remember. So getting pissy project funding awards that weren't nearly enough to keep them going was Michael Clark, DD8, the Chumleys, Shogun and Jayasingh, Matthew Ward, Invention Motion Pictures. I remember going to see Mark Murphy at the Place in a duet with Sue Cox and tapping him on the shoulder at the end and giving him my card and saying, I want you in my office in the next week, you know, because we have to give you some money. Because this is when the Arts Council was like, doesn't work like this is when it was going, my office was like a doctor's surgery, you know, and I'd be handing out drugs to people. Now it's like social services. But you know, we had money. We needed to get, you know, we would, and there was lots and lots of talent around Wade McGregor coming down the track. As I say, and the work was good, and it was interesting. And you had John Ashford at the Place, you know, masses going on. And actually, it just feels like there were a lot of things in the right place at the right time. We had an increasing budget at the Arts Council. It was at the beginning of the time when the Arts Council was desperate to get money out of London, because there was far too much money being spent in London, far too much money going to ballet, too many ballet companies, but when we tried to cut one of them, we got a massive, what we call the Basildon bond. You know, remember that old notepaper? This is pre-email. We got boxes and boxes of letters from audience members arriving in our office and questions in the House of Commons. I think we were trying to get rid of them from Ballet Theatre, if I remember. We failed. But there was no infrastructure for dance outside London. And there were no people really working outside London to look after anything. And actually what was brilliant at the Arts Council at the time was that we had Sue Hoyle as the dance director. And Sue Hoyle is someone who's a brilliant strategist. She's now running the Claw Leadership Programme. She's a brilliant manipulator. I'd like to say she gets really good people around her. And we also had Prue Skeen, who I think has sort of gone off the radar now, but she used to run Rambert. And she was one of those people who could really manoeuvre a big meeting to get the right result, to get what she wanted. And she was sitting on the top table at the council meetings, helping make the decisions about money. So you know what happens in bureaucracies and funding agencies. When you want to get something done, you have to pay a consultant lots of money to write a report for you. And at the end of that report, there has to be some recommendations. So Graham Devlin was commissioned to write a report called Stepping Forward, and I can't remember what year this is now. I'm looking at Rachel. 1992.
Mid-90s, I think, because it's coming into implementation around the end of the 90s. I know it's really better than that. Because I remember that I was working in Midlands Arts as it was then, around the time they were distributing the outcome of that report, which is the regional organisations and integrated, and that was 1991. So in the late 80s.
Because it was very obvious that what was needed was some building, like the theatre, drama had repertory theatres, all at Nottingham Playhouse, Newcastle Playhouse, all over the country there were buildings for drama with jobs, creative people gathering, plays being made and put on stage. We didn't have anything like that for dance. But what there were these kind of embryonic agencies like Dance City, in Newcastle, Swindon Dance, and so we created a network of of more of those buildings. I think this building was in the second phase.
Second phase, yeah. It was
to get these buildings with, big people who knew about dance running them, to give them a budget and a resource and some space. It's the spaces, it's the studio space to make things. And to get these key people, and then you had a sort of touring circuit. And then another one of my jobs at the time was what we called the admin scheme. So it was my job to set up and appoint a group of administrators, put an ad out, and so these administrators were planted at the agencies.
That's what we call producers now. In those days,
we'll talk about that later. Because I've come back to the word producer. And so the first batch of these administrators were people like Suzanne Walker, who's now got Big Cheese and Sabbathworth, Gwen Van Spike, Sarah. I mean, it's amazing that those people who were all kind of didn't really know what they were doing have now really become part of the infrastructure of dance. It was the kind of confluence of the talent, which is really what is most important, because if you haven't got the artists, then you haven't got anything to play with, if you like. The kind of manipulative, clever people at the arts. I mean, my job actually was I was out in the mud looking for, dragging the talent back to say, right, we've got to give you some money, and then building up a really strong project portfolio. Actually had a really good advisory panel, lots of brainy people on the panel, peer assessment. And as I say, the Arts Council wanting to increase the dance budget. So it's kind of, how is that going to happen for circus?
Is that something does really well, and does that ring true? Do people know that kind of that history of the dance agencies, the dance houses? I mean, I've always found it really interesting. And of course, those dance houses are still in operation today, but they're working kind of differently. They have to work differently. I guess, Rachel, my kind of question is, when you've worked in circus,
street dance,
outdoor, all of that. When you think of the journey that circus is on, contemporary circus, and what is needed, and when you hear the investment that went into dance in terms of infrastructure and financial investment, where do you think circus is now, the journey it's come on to now, to where it needs to go?
Well, to steal your phrase from earlier on, when you were talking about the idea that you talked about when we were in the first break, the idea that theatre was sniffing around circus.
No, sniffing around dance.
So it's the idea that circus at the moment is in a place because I think there's lots of reasons in terms of infrastructure and in terms of touring companies, so people can see what's going on across the world. But there has always been an interest in circus from the theatre sector and from the dance sector. And the idea of the sort of the directors or choreographers sniffing out other circus artists and including them in has sort of given, I think, a sort of credibility to circus. At the same time, circus itself is building its own reputation, its own vocabulary. So, I would say that Nikki and JD's work is a sort of pivotal moment when actually we realise that there can be something other, which we don't necessarily categorise it. And I think that there are shows like Kim, that was mentioned earlier on, we've got other companies which are really using one discipline or the other. But I think the future is this fusion, the other work that doesn't necessarily have a name. And I mean, what occurs to me is that there is no way that the Arts Council or anyone else are going to build circus centres or so. So I think that the dance development agencies should be able to host circus in some way, and sort of copying again what Victoria does, Victoria First from Huddersfield, which is one of our Sex Evolution partners, where we've got this Finnish company on tonight, tomorrow. she calls her performance program In Motion. So within that, she can program anything that has a, she doesn't classify it as dance or circus. Because the problem with classifications is that it becomes about marketing. I mean, marketing is very important. The audience is really important. You've got to get them in. You have to learn new audiences. But I sometimes think the categories are not helpful. And I know that Phil, you were talking about the idea of taking categories away, and that isn't helpful for someone's marketing. But I do also think that if you program work that audiences don't think they want, but you somehow get them in there and they love it, then actually there's a sort of, you can really, it's like in those days you were just talking about, the top line said ballet, and then underneath it came contemporary dance. Now at some point that changed and ballet came and was put underneath, and it's just dance. It's not even contemporary dance now, it's just dance. And I suppose this question about contemporary circus, or did you just say circus? Because research that we did for our Circus Evolution program showed that most people that we questioned, 500 people from 7 different locations, most people associated circus with animals, animal clowns, animal ringmasters. And when we showed them our marketing material to get a response from it, they also said it was too black in the background. They didn't know what it was. So I said, those of you who were here last year, and I probably said exactly the same thing, so I apologise, but that idea of trying to sort of reinvent what circus is within the context of where we are now, we don't need that journey that dance has been on, because we're sort of there in and amongst it, and it just is a case of really being able to sort of mobilise what we have. So yeah, I mean the only other thing I was just going to chip in say is the idea of, we talked so far about dance and circus, but one of the projects that we're involved in is combining hip-hop theatre and circus, which is a completely other conversation. We were chatting about it in the break just now, that because what our job is as producers and organisations who develop artists is to give those opportunities for what is bubbling under anyway, and just to help to garner that and help them on the way and have some interventions to sort of make some decisions. So I'm really excited about that, because I think actually we're in a position, we're not going back, but we're going into something new.
Brian, just from an artist's point of view, just to come back to this thing about infrastructure and the thing about the dance agencies, they're buildings, but half of them can't fly people, and there's a real kind of technical thing that needs to happen. Just from your point of view, finding organisations to support your practice, how hard is that?
You need to, generally you have to find a circus-specific space like this, if you're doing aerial, or you need a hype acrobatics. Dance centres generally, you can move here, but it's low, so it's finding them spaces that are useful for creation. To be honest, I've not started to make my own work. I work for other companies, if that kind of doesn't fall onto me a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't.
You just something that I find fascinating about your work, because you do. You have your work and you've seen a little bit, but you do this man things like you hang from cranes and European city culture launches. What was, how, could you just talk a little bit about that work that you do?
Yeah, my work's really broad, and I think that's partly to do with the fact that I have this crossover. I think a lot of my work comes from that crossover. Right. In terms of the hands work, I work a lot with Morton Plank, which are a fire company based up in Manchester, so I end up in a lot of situations where I'm hanging cranes or ships surrounded by fireworks. It happens. It's going to happen again at the end of this month, actually. I'm going to Athens. But along with that, yes, I do work. I do outdoor circus theatre, which I did that last year, toured with them for the last 2 years. And so I've done outdoor work, I've done small scale circus theatre work. Because I didn't go to circus school, I've only just started creating acts as such. So I have my own work now, my own acts that I can take into cabaret situations. So my breadth of work's large, and I've started to direct, a little movement direct. So I've started being asked to come in and being outside eye in that respect as well, in circus theatre world.
And is there enough work out there for you at the moment, or are there periods when...
It's about time to ask Steve.
Is there enough work out there?
I think that's probably largely why I do such a range of work, because then there is more option for work. I don't say I'm just this one kind of performance. I think that I would struggle. And also then I have to, in every job I do, what I end up performing, what I end up doing is always very different, or I have to learn on the job, or I bring in a skill that's not necessarily my discipline, and I have to train that up. So I have to I have to make myself adaptable to situations to be more employable in a way.
Just following on this from what we've been talking about in terms of the terminology, dance and circus, and does it need circus or contemporary circus? Does it say it for you? Does it define your practice?
I think contemporary circus does. So for me, when I think of contemporary circus, this is an umbrella term for me that completely encompasses theatre, dance, circuit. For me, that heading is all of that. That's what it is, the connotation for me. When I say circus, it is the big top traditional circus. Contemporary circus is very much more like theatre-based.
And just working out, what does that mean for audiences when you're playing contemporary circus? Do you think people are just confused? When you could Racehorse Company, and again, as part of Circus Evolution, this fantastic show, Circus Sunday, we kind of badged it as contemporary circus. We did struggle for an audience. We got a decent audience in the end. Does contemporary circus say it? We need to say something in terms of audience. I guess coming back to that again.
I think that until it's really embedded, the word contemporary does help. But I would imagine at some point that could be dropped. But I think the visuals is what sells it sometimes, and I know that there was a mixed feeling about the visual for Super Sunday Image.
What's coloured ball?
Yeah, it's very colourful. It's a trampoline. They use this two massive double trampolines that the artists hop from one to the other and do amazing sort of tricks on it. Visually, that's quite hard to contain. So I just think, I think it depends. It's hard. I think in cities where there's been a lot of contemporary circus and services, I think in smaller cities where it's just beginning. I don't know. There's people who want to program to me. What do you think? I think Steve in Manchester. What do you think?
Steve from Manchester.
Sorry, Steve from
I think marketing is difficult. I think the word contemporary circus makes it seem more edgy. If you say circus otherwise, it just feels like a family show. But contemporary helps get a younger, more capable audience to come and see it.
Did you think the family audience will come and see a contemporary circus show as well then? Or do you use it in contemporary context for more adult audience?
Yeah, it was an age restriction to some levels, and we didn't say it was for anyone. We just find audiences struggle for all of it, which is a shame. For nearly all circus at the moment.
What about dance?
Most dance sells pretty well.
But one of the reasons to do this, have a Circus Evolution program at Larry is to start developing that audience for you, isn't it? So it takes time. So here, for example, I think we've gone with Circus Evolution, we've gone from doing one night at a very low ticket price to doing up to 3 nights at double that ticket price, and that's over a period of 4 years. And it's the same in Huddersfield. Started off doing 1-nighters, box office split, and now we're doing 3-nighters on a fee, and we take the price of them up. So you think that's taken 4 years to do. And if we get the next round of strategic touring for Circus Evolution, by the end of it, we would have done 7.5-year programme of 10 venues around the UK. And you just think that's what you need. This is the sort of version, sort of little minute sort of part of what the Dance Contemporary is doing, chipping away, not only audiences but also programmers and the artists as well, to know that it's possible to do that.
It's the same as the Civic, you just have to do with the and
in Barnsley,
And in Barnsley, in Sheffield, so we're looking at how we join the dots.
Yeah.
And I think there's the work you just described in terms of sort of the illusion, but there's the stuff around it, as you say, the imagery that's communicated. I think Circus 250 next year it's going to be a massive missed opportunity because it will probably communicate a heritage perspective of Circus, which working.
Yeah, we have our way.
I mean, that's a critical thing for me in terms of visual communication. I think you're absolutely right. The word circus, if you ask, and I ask many kids who come to Green Talk, what the circus means to you, and of course it's going to be, and that's just like way bigger. It's not any direct experience either. It's just
do you think, Theo, that Circus 250, and I know there's a lot of programming going on in that, would you just like to say what it means to you, Circus 250? Because you've been involved in Circus for many years, you're now running Green Talk. What's next year, 2018? Is it a special year?
I think it's classic circus in a way. It's ballyhoo.
Define ballyhoo.
Ballyhoo, the classic, that's what traditional circus man will do. It's the impresario role of making something bigger than it actually is, right? And getting crowds in, and actually then having a great time. But it's a lot of noise, and that's what this is. It's a shrewd idea. It's very let's actually come together. It's very ready actually. And shout out something. I mean, it's without the airline. The perfect was going on to have the imagination to do that. And I think the opportunity to be harnessed by everyone is really strong. My concern for it is its ability to ask the question you asked, which is about what are the next 5 years, or what's the next 250 years?
Do you think too much about looking back?
Well, it is, isn't it? It is, and inevitably that's its frame. But the question has to be, what's the legacy of doing that?
Yes, of course.
And that's where the funding problem comes in, because it could turn out to be a 2012 situation where we go big, all guns blazing, give circus everything, and then after next year, people might be like, right, they've had 250 years. Write that down to reducing that. That could be what happens in a simple term from the arts council. I'm not saying they're going to do that, but that's what could happen. They could see it as an Olympic type of year for circus, and then straight after that.
Yeah, it's Olympic year without any money.
Yeah, yeah, agreed.
And I think one of the issues is getting that message right. Actually, the is being very clear that we need to talk about the next 250 years as well as the last. And actually, it's about trying to make sure that message comes out. So in Bristol, we're going to focus on the fact that Bristol has got a massive creative base for circus. So we won't be able to do all that to the big top on that and stuff like that. Happens everywhere. It will be that opening up all the workshops next year. And look at what people do where they make some things.
It's still
try and get that message out.
In Bristol, there was a kind of branding going on for the city of circus or the capital city of circus. Is that still? Is it Circus City? Sorry, yeah, it was near there. In terms of local authority, and is circus really embedded into that city?
In terms of local authority, it's not bad. They did pull out some money for some of these coordinate the 250 plans. I mean, perhaps basically. So they had that willingness to do that, which I think is encouraging. And I think they recognise that there is this great base of people living in Bristol, making all sorts of really interesting work, and a lot of individual artists, which contributes to Bristol likes to see itself as some of the edgy cities. Lots of new media stuff going on, circus things, parts of that. So one level we're lucky, but it's not money to do it. But there's a will to recognise that the circus is an important facet of the city.
Yeah, I mean, does everyone know what Circus 250 is? Because here we are saying it. So it will be in 2018. It will be the 250th year since the first permanent circus ring was built in Waterloo, in London. Now there were circus rings before that, but they were either made out of wood or sort of flimsy materials that either burned down or blew away. So Philip Astley built the first one. And so this year is a year to mark that. And as Thierry mentioned, Déda, who was a journalist and now runs a museum and circus and is passionate about circus, decided to try and get such a big noise made about it. It's going to be a localised to Bristol, Blackpool, Great Yarmouth, Newcastle, Underline, and activity in London and in other places which I can't remember. So is there anyone else on the list? No, thank you. So the Arts Council made it very clear in the beginning that there was not going to be a big bucket of money to do this, and that each organisation who was interested in developing Circus 250 projects had to look at ambitions for excellence and or grants for arts levels. So at the moment, No Fixed Date have got their own ambitions for excellence, which is to work in Newcastle Underline and to develop a big show within their big top, which is going to be the first time that you can sit down. And other activities that I will get hands crying out loud. We're just about, we haven't found out yet if we've got ours, but that is to have 3 large events which are interconnected, both in London and outside, which also uses local participants and emerging performers and hip-hop dancers and jugglers for a community project and show as well, which, if it happens, will then come back on tour into Circus Vision 2018. So there is a sort of idea of legacy there with that. And then alongside that, I think, just echoing what you say, the idea is that we will, in 20 years, we hopefully will look back and think, oh yeah, in 2018, that's when all this was really marked, and is a sort of a year that we can say lots of things began, rather than saying, oh, it was squashed into 2018 like the Olympics was. So I sort of feel that it's like if you tell yourself that's what it's going to be, then it will be, because we have to use the opportunity to really shout out and clear about that.
And is the opportunity in 2018, it's Circus 250, but does dance fit into that? Is the opportunity that's kind of crossing over?
I think we have to seize it.
And how do you do that?
Well, there's going to be a logo. I mean, what Déda is doing is she's put waiting on application, but the idea is that there will be a Circus 250 website and branding, and so that events can be badged. So there will be a sort of the idea to have local profile for events and for people who want to be part of that. There will be a press release and there will be a PR company. And so she is in the process of gathering, there is a coordinator that's been appointed who's in the process of gathering information who want to be part of Circus 250. And in London, there is a coordination by the Roundhouse of a sort of a London steering group, just because there are a number of larger big events and ideas floating about with that. So some of those will go outside London, all over the place, but the idea is that we coordinate what we do in London, so then we can actually see what opportunities are for when those events in London is to go outside.
Can I just feed into that? We've started a conversation with the Arts Council about Circus 250 legacy work, and one of the things I think the National Centre is probably likely to be leading on is post-Circus 250 kind of legacy. So in other words, letting what happened in 2018 happen, and then take some of the things that come out of it that are priorities that we're aware of within the sector nationally, and push them further. Things around teacher training, things around artist development, things around youth circus activity, stuff like that. There are certain areas that we know that we're in a really good position to coordinate nationally, and we've begun a conversation with the Arts Council about putting a either a project or a programme, I don't know which, in place along those lines.
Jason, what do you, in 10 years, it's a big question, but just in terms, as a national centre, and looking at the UK map, is it looking like an improving picture in terms of youth circus being set up? What is it spreading? Where is it in from your perspective?
It's interesting you ask, because I'm about to leave. I've spent a lot of time kind of going, how have things changed? And I've been in the National Centre for 12 years, and I think that there are certain, I can chart particular areas where I feel that things have really made a difference. I think that the reasons for positive thinking are around the constant innovation and energy and the passion and commitment of artists, which I don't find, I'm not aware of being in the same in other art forms. I'm not familiar with other art forms, but I do think that the circus is very lucky in that, because what makes people a good circus artist is courage and commitment and drive. It actually makes them really good at getting to where they want to go. So I feel very optimistic about the future of circus because of the calibre of artists, not just in terms of what they're doing on stage, but in terms of their commitment to make things happen themselves. I also think there's an enormous amount of positivity around the way the sector is managing itself. I think that we are one of the other things we've been able to learn from the dance sector is we've been able to look at how other art forms have developed and go, well, we don't want to do it like that. And that actually the kind of collaboration and the sort of spirit of us all having a common mission is incredibly valuable, and that actually the way we will make things happen is to continue to work together on a in our own different ways. And I think that's one of the big things I'm learning from Circus 250 is that the one thing that nobody has ever tried to do is stop anybody else doing something. But I think that actually, because all the activity that we're all doing is about taking the art form forward in different ways.
An example of that is City Cirque and what happened when City Cirque came together, which was an informal, not monetarised network of London venues who had circus in common. And out of that came Campus. And that just happened because we all wanted to know was there any money. We met 4 times a year to exchange ideas and information. And at every meeting, we'd go around, do a round robin and say what we had on, who we were working with, and everyone would always say, oh, I need to book this by a certain date. What, in the autumn, I need this type of show. And we suddenly realised that actually those meetings get longer and longer and longer as more people joined and more people opened up for service programming. And then we thought, well, actually, we need to do a showcase. And then that's how that sprung up. I mean, that's done on a wing and prayer, 150,000 application. And the amount of international programs we actually came to the last one, you think actually now to hang on, brakes on, let's do this properly. Because that internationalism in circus is, I think, very different with to other art forms. Because I mean, in itself, circus is, it's itinerant, and they're all in terms of international students and how people do swap skills and methods from. It's very easy to travel with circus because it's not word-based. So I just think that international strand is also something that's really important and has to be factored into whatever the future is. So I was at one of the
dance had that as well. Can I just say, I also think it's very important that the Roundhouse came on stream, because that's a big venue in our capital city, lots of media coverage. And in the same venue, you've got these very famous pop groups going on, sort of side by side with the circus, and somehow that adds to the cachet. So that's like a big gathering point. And there was something I was trying to say in the last session, but I didn't want to put my foot in it. But for me, my most exciting circus experiences have been encountering something that is quite feral, which a word that hasn't come up yet, which I think is what circus has to offer the arts. And it is about being untrained. It might be that thing where I'm expecting people to live in caravans. It's probably not about having animals. But if I think back to my... Probably not. But if I think back to my favourite experiences as a child, or with Circus Oz, did anyone ever see? Or that Australian company where they were all sort of dirty, naked acrobats, very kind of mad. So, and one of the things, I do think that one of the things that Nikki and JD have is you've just got that little edge of something feral that immediately makes you stand out for me in the middle of very methodical truth. You're very visible within that group. So don't lose the feral thing. Don't let the academics take over.
Okay, so countering what Julia just said, not countering, but just it's a kind of thought that's in my head, and it's about this kind of dance, we need to come to an end soon, but this kind of dance and contemporary circus, and thinking about higher education, and thinking about artists articulating their practice, and you can look at Trinity Laban, place whatever, and you have MAs, you have postgraduate, doctorate, people do doctorates in choreography or whatever. That postgraduate level of articulating practice is that something that needs to happen within circus? Is it happening already? Does it need to happen? And will that help in terms of the conversation going forward in terms of legacy? We've got two higher education, we've got Nick and we've got Daisy sitting. Jesus. Nick, what do you
I think
think?
the short answer is yes.
Yes.
Because I think if you don't have to develop into an art form, you need to have the academic alongside the punks appearing from nowhere who suddenly do something nobody's ever thought of before, kicking chainsaws or whatever it might be. And you need all of those things to develop alongside each other. So we're starting an directing circus,
yes.
Which I think is very pertinent to the discussions that we've had today, because we're talking about how do you direct circus in a way that acknowledges the limitation and the possibilities now, and don't impose the ones and the others. It's all stuff like choreographers who can't deal with the fact that you have to stop at some point. We're actually saying if you have no understanding of circus, you can't come in the MA, even if the world's greatest choreographer, because we don't want to test every year, then finding out those bits of that process that the results of that. And we've got a teacher who's doing a PhD, who's going beyond the trip at Dock. And we would like to be hosting our own PhD students at that, the right point in the future. And that sits alongside the other artist development work we're doing. I think that's a crucial thing. If you're 22 and straight out of university, you've done a fantastic degree. NCTA, almost good. You need another 5 years because it takes 8 years to get to the right place, and that will lead to how everybody works together. Because the discussion we had today was about the fact that if you're trying to do dance and circus, you need twice as long, basically. So it's not going to happen in one place. So we need the people who are supporting circus to work together. I think a lot of those organisations are there, in the way that those dance agencies, Julius and stuff were there in 1991. Or somebody worked for one of them in 1991. So I think the bits of structure are there, but we need to put quite an effort into
I think there's
that work.
Just to add to that, I think there's also a thing around us being braver about articulating, communicating what our research is. What Nikki and JD presented to us was potentially a piece of action research that is an academic paper in terms of what they've done. But none of us, well, most of us, the academics might have done, but I didn't look at that and think that's an academic paper. I actually thought that's a really interesting presentation. But actually to academia, and within academia, that was a paper. That was a
paper. Let's ask Richard, academic in the corner. Did you think it was?
Yes, I mean it's a personal journey for individuals, I think, in terms of their relationship to both dance and contemporary circus. As artists, I'm a musician, so I'm a performer. And when I put myself before an audience, I'm very interested in what I look like to the audience through my art form, my medium. And what I'm struggling with today really is what is the medium? What is it that's being communicated from an artistic perspective? Where does emotion fit in? So lots of questions for me. And I suppose what I'm trying to say in terms of postgraduateness and articulation of what it means to be reflective of one's practice. I suppose an MA is looking at how one contextualises your own practice in relation to what it is. And I hesitate to say, is it dance, circus, is it performance? Is it something that you've manufactured, if you like, in terms of an audience perspective, or your own personal expression? So where do you sit in relation to, we spoke about introspection, extroversion, there's loads of dynamics and interesting areas to explore, but I've not got the answers, I'm more confused than ever.
But in a way that's important, because I think you can't carry on unless you ask those questions. You do get confused, we have some chaos. And then,
it's reflecting on
Lost
that.
Dog ending up being Lost Dog because it was going to be something else. And you do that, you have that journey. And I think that it's so important. So if you can, that actually having those like your main, whatever you're going to do here, it's so important because it should be replicated. It's not just one or two places. It needs to happen, and it needs to be sort of part of the sort of current, the general currency of prospectuses you open it, and that's what you see. We lost John Paul Zaccarini to Doc,
and also Jonathan, who's now, I can't remember again, Bristol. Yeah. So they're both, doing studies like this at their doc, because they were performers and they wanted to push it further, and there wasn't anywhere to do it in the UK, and they're there. So they need to be brought back, and given the post to sort of help lift the bar.
So listen, we have to go into Studio 1 in a minute, where our young kids, our youth academy are going to do a presentation. Is there anything else before we round up? I found it really useful today, but before we go next door, is anyone got anything they want to bring up, or we're going to go away and reflect, obviously. From Déda's point of view, we're looking at developing an MA that will come online hopefully September 2019, and that will be of what we spoke of today. I'm not going to put a title on it. And then we're looking at this kind of ambition of expansion over the next 5 years. So lots of kind of thinking going on in this organisation. We want to make this a regular symposium going forward, and that will happen. Is there anything, any sum up? Is there anything you want to say?
Someone else starts.
Yeah.
I suppose I think it's really, I sort of want to thank you for the work you're doing here, because it's been happening very slowly, but it's very sure, and I suppose I think that it's just brilliant, and I think with Circus 250 and all everyone else in the room is doing similar things. It takes all of us to do it. It's not just the one or two individuals, it's all of us. Partnership, collaboration, we're doing it, so yeah.
And Rachel.
Yes, somebody who's watched reports on this is absolutely fascinating. I think driving on confusion has come back into my head again. I think what I really want to tell you is I think what's been really impressive with me is the kind of intricacy of this launch of the research that's evident in what we're talking about today. And actually how important this project is, not just because it's happening, but because it's recorded, so that all this kind of debate and kind of trying to tease out what the issues are and whether it's contemporary circus or its performance in general is really really important. So I think it's fantastic that these are happening and that they're being very well documented.
Brilliant, thank you.